El HDMI. Vale.
Román, empezamos en la 19, ¿de acuerdo? Hola. Sí, hola, buenos días. Nada, vamos a empezar con el segundo día, la primera charla de DevOps. Tenemos a Omar. Omar nos va a hablar sobre DevOps y bueno, su charla se llama DevOps y Fondue. Y nada, vamos a ver qué nos cuenta. Todo tuyo.
Gracias. Ante todo, agradecer a la organización la posibilidad de estar hoy, esta mañana aquí, pues presentando esta charla. También a todos vosotros por venir. La verdad, lo primero que te voy a decir es que soy un público deslumbrante porque no veo nada con las luces. Bueno, la presentación se llama DevOps y Fondue. Voy a empezar hablando de la Fondue, que va a ser más corto y va a ser más fácil. La fondue es, como seguramente muchos sabéis, es el plato más típico de la gastronomía suiza. Se hace con dos tipos de queso de allí de la región, gruyère y otro queso local. Se pone junto, se le añade un poquito de vino blanco, ajo, pimienta, se calienta para que se funda y se come con el pan. La verdad es que está súper bueno. Un par de advertencias, sin embargo, si tenéis el colesterol alto no es el mejor plato para comer, no sería light precisamente, no es indicado tampoco para comer antes de hacer ejercicio. Un día me comí una y luego fui a jugar a fútbol y la verdad es que fue una pésima idea y es un plato invernal. No intentéis comerla aquí en la Castellana.
Okay. Who am I? I am BENJUMEA, and I've spent over 10 years in the world of information security. I've gone through several Spanish companies, the SIA Group, Raco 04. I'm also in Caja de Ingenieros as security officer. And from last year, I collaborated with the WOC in a security masters. And since 2014, I took the car and my family and we went to Switzerland. And I'm working for the company Kudelski Security. This company is part of the Kudelski Group. It's a Swiss company based in Switzerland, and it started halfway through the last century. At the beginning, they did quality sound recorders that newspapers or journalists use a lot, also in Hollywood, to record the audio tracks of films. And the company has a couple of Oscars in the technical department. And in time, in the 90s, they moved towards ciphering pay TV signal because recording was not so much in demand. And in fact, the Kudelski Group might not ring a bell, but an aggravation might be more familiar to you. At the end of the 90s or in the beginning of 2000, you may have had to look for an aggravation to see certain things on internet without paying. And this is what I've been told. Of course, I never did such a thing. And some 5 years ago, the company decided to start working in a new sphere, which is information security. And they created Kudelski Security. And amongst the services they offer are the managed security services. And for that, they've set up 2 SOCs. And the first one is in Switzerland, in a small village of some 5,000 inhabitants, and it's good quality of life. And they have not only Fondue, but it's also a quiet place. Perhaps in winter, early on Monday morning, they are 10, 15 degrees below zero. You're in a hurry to get to the car as soon as possible to heat the car up. And what you easily can find is that the car that was black in the evening is white. And this is not the best way to begin the week, having to go for the shovel. But the company takes care of the workers, and when they were wondering about where to set up a second SOC, they said, let's look for a place that it's nice for countries that do not like cold so much. And they thought that Phoenix, Arizona was a good place. It's not cold, that is true. They were hesitating between the Almeria Desert and Phoenix, and finally, because of market reasons, they chose Phoenix. And it is true that it's not at all cold. And if you think Madrid is hot in the summer, try this. And why am I talking about SOCs if we are in the DevOps track? The Department of Managed Security needs a number of applications. For instance, we have a portal to interact with customers where they can follow their security incidents and look at the state of their devices for managed security. They can download reports, etc. We also need tools for analysts to be able to do their job, so they can do the triage of alerts in a more efficient way. We need tools to automate all reports. And all of that was done by a small department with 4 developers, in fact, 4 external consultants a couple of years ago, back end, front end, and then Christy, who did a bit of everything. He'd done analysis. He could help in front end and back end. They were developing at the time the first version of this customer portal, and they were using a waterfall approach. They'd done a requisites collection with the business. They'd done a business analysis through weeks, a month, a couple of months, negotiated the contract, and they started to code and do the prototype and approve it. They took a few months, I think 6-9 months, to develop the portal, and when it was almost ready for delivery and go to production, we realized that that portal that was based on the requirement collection done a month before was no longer good or was no longer appropriate. And why? Because the world changes very fast, but the information technology world changes even faster, and security, computer security changes even faster. A year ago, this company had a single SOC in Switzerland, less than 12 customers, all from Switzerland, and a year later we have 2 SOCs, we have over 100 customers, and most of them are in the United States. So these requirements that were defined a year and a half ago or 2 years ago are no good anymore. So because the paradigm has changed radically. Another problem that we encounter, or another situation, is that we have a traditional model. We had the developers on the one side and operations, the people who had to take that software and maintain it in production. And we have a wall of confusion in between the 2 departments. In our case, in fact, this was a physical wall, because we had an office where for developers, and I was with them. And behind the wall, we have the other people, the information technology. And if you wanted to talk to them, you have to go along the corridor and go into their office. And one of the first things we did was to break that wall and have an open space where developers and operations work together. This world of confusion, be it physical or a virtual wall, what it entails is that communication is complex between the 2 sides. And why is that so? Well, the communication is complex because you look at things in a different way when you're in development or in operations, and you look at things in a different way because you have different goals. The goal of development is they get paid to develop new things and to push change, but people in operation prioritize stability, and changes for them sort of disrupt normal operations, and that's the main reason for tensions to come up between both departments. I've seen this often in big corporations, in banks, where these teams tend to report to different people, and that's where you find a lot of tension between the different teams. Something else that happens is that due to this lack of communication and this difference in mindset, when you want to bring to production a new release, it becomes harder. And traditionally, you need days or even weeks sometimes to prepare a release. And even if you've tested it thoroughly, what you're going to bring to production, and the developers can swear that it has been tested and there'll be no problem. But on the weekend, because this usually happens over the weekend when and at 5 a.m., it often happens that what had been tested thoroughly and couldn't fail does fail, and that means and you have a big problem, and that means that the morale of the team is not very high. People in development are not so motivated, and people in operations are also tense when they have to bring to production a new release. And for the business, the perception is as the technical teams and the development teams are not efficient. I've been told that a presentation cannot be successful without the picture of a cat. So this is mine. So the organization realized that it had a problem. And that's the first step to solve any problem, to realize that the problem is there. And they decided to look for a solution. And they considered moving through to agile methodologies. I have to say that agile and DevOps is not the same thing. That's clear. But they are like the good Jaburo and the good Ribera del Duero wine. They are not the same thing, but they go together incredibly well. So as I was working in consulting, they proposed to me to become part of the new team they were going to set up. And at the beginning, I hesitated because, first of all, because I've never been very agile. I struggled with cartwheels when I was a kid, so I wasn't that clear about this, and I had no experience in development. For me, development, in fact, was what these people do to introduce vulnerabilities in applications. Developers look like nice people and they gave us work, and that's good, but I had no experience in that area. And I decided to accept because it was a challenge, an opportunity to learn new things, and also to be able to come to Root for free and make a presentation. So I'm happy with my decision. Because I haven't said that, but I come from Catalonia, so getting anything for free is great. I'm not going to explain what agile is, because Pau did that already in his presentation, and I'm sure you all are clear on this. But I just want to mention that my role as product owner, what I do is the cloud part. To maintain the backlog, to prioritize, and to tell the team what needs to be done, and when the sprint is over, to make sure that what's being delivered as part of that sprint is what the business is expecting. The Agile Manifesto, I'm sure you're familiar with as well. I just want to make 2 comments. Everything is important, but the first line to me is the most important one. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. At least in our case, it's been key to really launch the whole agile process and for it to really work. And I'm sure you also know that, but I want to remind you that the Agile Manifesto is not read in terms of the one to the left is what needs to be done and the right-hand side does not need to be done. That's not the case here. The left-hand side is very important, is more important, but you cannot forget about the right-hand side. When we decided to go for this change, the reactions on the side, both of development and of the business, were similar. And the reaction at the beginning was like this. They were skeptical for different reasons. Development thought, now they call this agile, but it's going to be more of the same. And it's just that the business is going to have an excuse to change priorities every 2 weeks. So it's going to be hard for us. And for business, there are also worried. They were worried, thinking that perhaps Agile and DevOps were just going to make development have an excuse so that they, rather than work, they'll start playing with Docker and fun technologies. It's not an easy change. It's a cultural change, shifting towards a DevOps model. It takes time. It's not that you have to do it little by little. It's better to do it at once and really jump into doing DevOps and Agile sort of full on. But the time you need to get to see results and see an improvement is not short. It's not that you start with Agile tomorrow and in a couple of sprints you're working at high speed. It's actually you need an investment and from the company for it to really produce results. It's also true that it's a cultural change. It's not just something that affects the development department. It's a change that affects globally the whole company. The whole company, or at least all departments that are going to interact with development and operations. If you just change development, but the rest of the organization departments are not willing to play with along the new rules, it's not going to be successful. It's also important, if you do not have experience on these issues and people haven't any experience on the DevOps or the Agile world before, it's good to have help from outside. We had a consultant company, and for me it was very positive because I had no prior experience, but also to raise awareness in the other departments that had to interact with development so that they could understand what the new rules were, what they could expect, and what they could demand. Another important element was the integration of those consultants. Those who wanted to were offered a job in the company. 2 of them accepted to be hired, and the others continued as consultants. And then we increased the size of that department, but with in-house people. And that's important. It helps in terms of teamwork and motivation if people are in-house and not just consultants who are here today but maybe gone tomorrow. Communication is crucial, and it's crucial in terms of the transparency that the development team, the DevOps team, provides to the rest of their organization to explain what's being done, why it's being done, which are the blocking points, and why a certain technical architecture has been chosen. Transparency is crucial for that. And it's also very important for the business to be able to communicate and to make the development teams see what's the vision for the product and where you're heading for, what you want to do. And it's also very important that when you convey the requisites for a new functionality, that you should focus on why, rather than the fact that it has to be done. A silly example, and it's let's imagine that the business wants an application that it's a red button in the middle of the screen, and that's what they demand from the development team. And this team says, we already have code for a yellow button in the middle of the screen, and why should we write a new rather than using the one we have? But if business tells us, I need this application or this screen with the red button because I need to check if my users have daltonism. So that will encourage and motivate the team to do so, and or to have the red one, and they may actually have offered the option of perhaps having also a green one, or they may contribute suggestions related to the motivation, the reason for wanting to have that red button in the middle of the screen. So talking further about Agile, one of the things that of the misunderstandings that are sometimes there is that Agile doesn't mean planning. That's not true, because that's what I get paid for. To maintaining the backlog is a way of planning and to define priorities. But it is true that traditionally you did planning at the beginning of the project, quite a detailed planning with all the brainstorms, etc. Whereas here, what you do is you focus a lot on what's going to come in the next few weeks, and what's farther away, you just define the outline, what you think would be needed, but you don't devote that much time because that may change afterwards. This is one of the issues that has generated more tension between business and development, because business, at the end of the day, is quite used to its project plans and its Gantt diagrams, and to having the information that the project will be over on the 15th of June or the 30th of June at 7 p.m. And then the project finishes in Christmas, but if they have the project plan, they feel safer. And that's an important part of the cultural change, where they have to accept that this is no longer possible. And they have to accept it, because otherwise perverse things can happen, like that the estimates are taken as deadlines, and that means that that it complicates the working of DevOps and Agile if the business is not willing to play. And the issue of deadlines, if you think about it, it's really tetric. Or if I were a development, they told me I had a deadline, I would be worried. In the PMP certificate, I'm doing that, and because I want to get a certificate for doing this talk, I'm going to give you a bit of theory. Any project, nothing has a scope, and some time to be carried out, and requires some resources. And in my experience, the scope is too big, and the time and the resources are too small. I haven't ever found a project or participated in a project where this is not the case. The scope tends to be predefined. You want to do a house or a bridge or whatever, and you calculate, and you have your resources, and then you make an estimate of when you'll have it, 15th of June, and then it will not happen until Christmas. So the time is flexible, and if you do not want to be flexible because you want to meet the deadline, then you have to increase resources. If we move to the new Agile model, here time is fixed. Every 2 weeks, every sprint, you're going to deliver a new version of the product. But in this case, what needs to be flexible, if time is fixed, and then the scope needs to be flexible. So you estimate what you're going to do in one sprint, and you try to do it. Sometimes you do more, sometimes you'll do less, and sometimes you do exactly what you had estimated. But that paradigm is different in this way. One of the issues we wanted to launch or that I personally would have liked to launch, was not to do peer reviews, but peer programming. To have two developers working with a single computer. We have not got there. The team has tried it, but it's not something that we do all the time, because it's complex. for the business to accept that we're going to be more productive if we have the two employees working on the same computer. But what the team decided to at least try was peer reviews. Once something's over, you ask a colleague to come, they discuss the code, and they decide why it's been done one way and not another. And this has several advantages. You can find a way to improve it because your colleague tells you, or because when you're explaining it to somebody else, you realize that there is a way in which you can improve it. And it also helps to disseminate the knowledge of the code throughout the team, because you're given support 24/7 if you get a phone call early on a Saturday morning. It's good for you to know not only your code, but what your colleagues have done. Testing is always a complex issue, and I have a colleague that says that testing is the dark side of development. So this picture felt to me to be perfect. In the traditional approach, it's something that you always leave for the end, and when there's more pressure and more rush. So you find that if you want to meet the deadline, then you always reduce testing. Quality is going down, but you take that risk because you want to meet the deadline. So what we did for testing was, and this was decided by the team itself. It's developers, the ones who are programming the functional tests. They use Protractor for the front-end part to automate everything to do with testing and have it within the continuous delivery part. I also want to mention quickly some of the Scrum rituals and how we have implemented them. They were not invented by, rituals were not invented by Scrum. They've existed always with humankind, but Scrum has adopted them. It's about repeating things.
About social interactions taking place in a safe environment, because things are usually done in a certain way, at the same time, in the same place, doing the same movements, and these makes us feel safer, and those interactions become easier. The best known Scrum ritual is the daily meeting that lasts for 15 minutes. Ours are more boring than the Star Trek's meeting. You don't find any aliens around, but if it does happen in the future, I'll let you know. And we've got this slightly here, because it's one of the points where the evolution can be most clearly seen in the team. When we started 1.5 years ago, the daily Scrum was a daily meeting. It always lasted more than 15 minutes. Swiss people found it hard to discuss certain things, and there were endless meetings. And people just talked a lot about what they did the day before to prove that they had done a lot with the colleagues and with the boss. And things have changed a lot now. We do talk about what was done the day before, what we're thinking of doing today, but the main focus is in what we need from the rest of the colleagues. OMAR, I need you to review this because I finished. I need someone to help me reviewing the code. Or I have this problem, I don't know how to solve it. Could anyone please give me a hand and we'll do it together? Another very important ritual is planning, sprint planning, and grooming the backlog. And here we use planning poker. was a bit skeptical at the beginning. Should we use cards at work? But I was pleasantly surprised because it's very effective. So it's people like discussing things, and if you had to estimate something by reaching consensus, it would take hours. And if I do my job well and things are well defined and the team understands it well, the estimation will be very homogeneous and it will be very quick and easy to reach a consensus regarding how complex is that story. Here's the demo. That's the time to show off and share with our colleagues what we have done in the last spring. It's also important to get feedback ASAP by the business. And then here's the most important ritual, the sprint retrospective. It's about reviewing what we've done in the last 2 weeks, seeing what's been good, what's been bad, and what could be improved. And so far, this is the most effective continuous improvement implementation model. At the end, the team decides on 1 or 2 initiatives. 1 is usually enough regarding things that we need to do to try to improve. We test them for a couple of weeks, and then we see whether we change something. We could change the chair, the coffee machine, the daily scrum time, the tool being used, anything the team thinks might improve. One of the results of these initiatives was the following. We started using a Scrum and 2 weeks sprint, and at some point the team decided to follow a Kanban team. Instead of doing a sprint, we do a continuous development flow, and whenever the team would be available, they would get the same story, the same item that had the most priority at the time. After a few months, circumstances changed, and a couple of months ago, the team decided to go back to Scrum and establish the 2-week sprints, which is okay. So eventually, the thing here is that this is very useful to have continuous improvement, and it also allows the team to self-organize and make decisions internally. It's not just about doing sprints or Canva. The team discusses and reaches a consensus. And a very important thing here is checking what works for the team. And once you know what works, you need to choose a tool that fits well within that process. If you choose a tool well, for example, at the beginning we were thinking of using Year, Linked, version 1. So the consultants gave us a good idea. They said, well, wait a little bit, begin with just a blackboard or a whiteboard with handwritten post-its. Try what works, what doesn't, distribute the columns in a different way and see what works for the team. And after some time, you may decide which tool you're going to use, and then you can use the one that really works for your team. Now I've told you about the product owner function, and this is quite basic, because that's a key position, because the way in which they need to protect the team is very important. They need to avoid interferences, and having 10 different people asking for things for the team, we need to check the priorities, and that person, the PO, shares with the business which is the development situation, why things are being done in a certain way. So this is an important position, even though at the beginning it may not look like it. You're not programming code, that's what developers are there for. So initially I thought that I would be there and I wouldn't be doing much. But after a year and a half I've seen that is a very important position, and that there is a lot of work involved. So now I'm actually going to change and go back to management security services, and we're going to have a new product owner. I'm going to quickly talk about DevOps, because you know how this works. At the end of the day, we're trying to link these two worlds, development and operations. And the aim is that the delivery is as continuous as possible, so that the fit works well, so that we can automate this as much as possible, so that developments do not need to send that package to operations every 3 months. If we do things in a continuous way, we know that it's going to work. In our case, the organization that we set up is made up by the development teams, split per product, or to the service recipients, and then we have a cross-sectional infrastructure team giving service to all these development teams. We have development and infrastructure profiles which are within a Scrum team, and eventually participate in the rituals. They participate on the daily tasks in collaboration with developers. There are teams that are out of the Scrum that do horizontal automation or networking tasks. And there's a guy in the middle there, because there are a few profiles, because they're not they're not easy to find, who are able to program Java code and deal with infrastructure items. And this helps cohesion for the team. Technologically speaking, the business was right at the beginning. This was a good excuse to use really good tools, and we really enjoy using them. We started with Git for infrastructure and development, Docker for production. In fact, the applications are in Docker containers, and Chef and Puppet to automate and standardize infrastructure, Zabbit and Mataro and Datadog for monitoring. Another concept that we focused on a lot, and that the infrastructure team has worked on quite a bit in the last year, is to implement the infrastructure as a code, which is just to get processes and tools that have been traditionally used for software development and apply them at the infrastructure level. I mean to have a version control in the infrastructure, to be able to automate tests infrastructure-wise, and to be able to do a rollback whenever things do not work properly. And there are some things to be improved, some challenges that we need to solve. These are the most important ones for us now. Right now, we are certified in ISO 27001, and that doesn't always link well with the agile concept and with DevOps. Regarding documentation, if you tell the ISO auditor that we are in agile and we want to have the code functioning instead of investing in documentation, it will be difficult to persuade the auditor. So we need to work a bit to find the middle ground that will allow us to keep that certification. And the business is used to getting some indicators, and here we need to improve, because transparency and the way in which we communicate the state of things isn't always the best, and I think it may be improved. And as Paul mentioned yesterday, we used to do pen testing before each release, because we do the release every 3 months. So if every week we're gonna do something new, we cannot do pen testing. So we need to improve the way in which we put the security in continuous delivery. And we also need to improve how we manage technical debt. This is unavoidable, we need to live with it, and we need to find the middle ground. Getting into some debt is okay, because we need to move fast, but this shouldn't be a burden for long-term development. And there are challenges, but also opportunities. Eventually, DevOps and Agile are all about automating, so let's also automate security. Yesterday was mentioned that it's important to avail of the opportunity to have that automation and that pipe, to have security controls there. That may range from automating the vulnerability scans or launching access for infrastructure whenever there are infrastructure changes. Trying to automate is not difficult because tools are expensive and they tend to generate many false positives, but also we should try to automate as much as possible the detection of vulnerabilities. And there's something else here. Right now it's very quick to develop a patch and to deploy a patch. Once you detect a vulnerability, you do not need to wait for weeks. I remember that at a bank, to deploy a patch in all the systems, in all the technology part, took between 6 and 9 months. Fortunately, this is not the case anymore. If you want to deploy a patch in our infrastructure, it just takes minutes. And just to finish, I'd like to reinforce 3 takeaway messages. On the one hand, understanding that this is a culture change. If you just change the development team and they decide to use Agile, maybe things will improve. Maybe they'll manage to be more motivated and get a faster development. But here you're not going to use the full potential that DevOps and Agile may provide, because the rest of the departments need to want to play this Agile game. As we have just seen, we need to automate. DevOps and Agile are all about automating. So let's try to automate everything, including security, because this is really the only way of doing things. Just like for having quality in the code in an Agile and DevOps models, things need to be automated. If we need to have security, it also needs to be automated. And then retrospectives. For me, this is the most useful Agile ritual. It's a very powerful way of doing continuous improvement, so we needn't be afraid. We need to test, experiment, see what works. If it works, we keep it, and if it doesn't work, we just discard it and implement something else. And that's it from me. I went a bit fast towards the end. I was a bit pressed according to the time constraints, but I would like to thank you again for inviting me to give the speech here. I hope it was interesting. I think we have plenty of time for questions if you have any.
¿Alguna pregunta?
Any questions?
Aquí tenemos una.
Over here.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask whether you're developing Agile for all sorts of solutions, or whether you keep following a traditional methodology for other changes who do not have so much business uncertainty. That's a good question. Well, we're actually working with Agile for everything. It has been embedded little by little. Initially, we're working with a service that gave service for tool development for management security services. And little by little, the engineering teams developing software have gradually migrated to this Agile and DevOps model. However, if you need to do short-term specific project, sometimes it might make more sense to use such a regional approach. For a 1-month project, if you do it with an agile team that is already available and has a bandwidth and availability to develop that project, you can do it with agile. However, if you need to set up a new team, it might make more sense to use a waterfall approach if project is small, instead of setting up agile, because you need a certain history to see the benefits, and 1 month might not be enough. Any other questions? Hi, congratulations for your speech. You mentioned that one of the challenges was to integrate security in this whole process, and I wanted to know whether you're already approaching some sort of initiative in this regard. Well, we began using the process we already have for automating the functional tests, so that within that process we can have use cases for security and start testing security. For example, a usage case might be that a customer cannot see the data reports from another customer. And by the way, this is quite easy to automate from a functional test point of view, even though this case is all about cybersecurity. And right now we're implementing initiatives to go beyond, and we're doing vulnerability scans continuously. They're not really integrated within the pipe, so we do not detect those vulnerabilities until they're in production. But if we're able to put that in the pipe, we can detect it before it goes to production and then block it, instead of implementing that change that will introduce some vulnerabilities. But this is one of the scopes where we need a bit more experience, and I think that in general in the market there is a lack of solutions. Little by little, manufacturers provide tools, and there is a growing market, but there aren't that many solutions that you can easily integrate. I think that down here there was some question. Hi. A couple of questions. First, you started describing the times you had before implementing the new models. These are about 6 months. And are you now managing metrics regarding how you manage to reduce those times with some specific examples?
Te voy a poner un ejemplo.
Yes. The production of a new release 1 or 2 years ago, I remember that we needed about a week. It was like 2 or 3 days with 2 or 3 people to prepare the release, and there are a couple of days with several people doing the functional tests manually before going to production. And here now we need less than 1 hour to have a new release ready for this and ready to go into production. This would be one of the examples of time reduction. And my second question is focused on the team. There was a slide where you mentioned how different Scrum teams related to other people, and I'm more interested on the infrastructure. How did the daily work change, and how did the new model impact on the life of people who are managing the infrastructure? Well, in my opinion, this is much easier for them, and sometimes the business itself needs infrastructure to do something, but that doesn't happen that often. Usually it is the developers who ask for things. Well, I want a new machine, I want to change some rules, whatever. Before, there used to be a very rigid process where you needed to open up a ticket and wait for quite a few days or 2 weeks. But now you don't need to wait. You have them there, you can talk to them, and Then we say, well, okay, how urgent is it? Can it wait until tomorrow? Can it be done today? I think that there is less visibility. Or there is more visibility. When you understand why things are happening, it's much easier for them to explain why things may not be done today and why they need to wait until tomorrow. Before, however, there used to be much more confusion. We have time for one more question. And this is the last question we have time for. Well, thank you very much for your question. I do have a couple of questions. Who needs to automate the security tests? The security people, developers? Do I need to learn Jenkins? That's my first question. And then the second question is very interesting to apply it to other deployments, at least in our case. They're quite tricky, which are the third-party security patches, such as Microsoft, IBM, and so on. Do you have experience with that, with doing third-party patch regression tests for exploring other things? I have a really bad memory, so I hope I'll remember both questions. In fact, I can't remember the first one now. Okay. It's not that difficult when we saw that with the ratio of 1 to 245. Our company works in security. There are many people who know a lot about security, but in the infrastructure and development departments we don't have security specialists, and we cannot have someone there just dealing with security exclusively to program these tests. Eventually this is a challenge, and this is something we need to improve. But I think that we really need to have the possibility within the Scrum team to be like security champions and have that security vision, not full-time, because that would be science fiction, but rather they should be able to advise the development team and look at the security tests, take into account the risk of that application, so they can decide what they need to implement. And that implementation in continuous delivery needs to be done by the developers or by the infrastructure part. And these are the people who are really going to pilot the technical side. And then regarding the second question, okay, third-party patches. Eventually there's no big difference regarding how to deploy a third-party patch or your own software patch. If you have the infrastructure as a code and you've automated the tests when you do an infrastructure change, it's quite simple. You apply the patch in your integration environment and you make sure that your application keeps working, the systems keep working. There's no big difference between the third-party patches and your own applications patches. And that's one of the objectives eventually of getting DevOps together, so that you can have the same process for infrastructure and development. Well, just to finish, a big round of applause for OMAR, and we would like to thank you for your presence. Thank you.